Ubuntu image running, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow instructions in setting up my simple web application. So the first thing to do is install Python. So I'm not going to install the remaining dependencies there. I'm just going to install Python. So I'm going to run apt-get install Python. It cannot locate the package Python. That's because you have it run the apt-get update to update the package index. Okay, so I've run that, and now I'm going to run and try and install Python. Okay, so it's installed Python, and if I run Python command, I can see that Python 2.7 is installed, which is good. Okay, so I'm good with that. So the next step is to install Flask. So I'm going to use pip install Flask. So pip is not found, so I need to install pip first. So I'm going to do apt-get install Python pip.
I hope you know that pip is the Python installer.
I'm now going to install the Flask dependency for my web application using pip. Okay, so that's installed and it's successful. So I can now run my web server using the Flask run command. But for that, I need the source code, of course. So I go to my source code, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the source code of the application and create it here. So I'm going to put the source code in /opt/app.py. I'm going to paste the source code there. I'm going to follow the instructions here to run the application, which is this. I'm just going to copy that and run it. Okay, so it's inside opt folder. So I'm going to go there and we'll run that again. So as you can see, my Flask application is currently running. Now, how do I access my web server? So if you remember, when I ran the Docker container using the docker run command, I haven't actually mapped a port to my Docker host. And so the only way to access my application is to go in to the host and access it from a web browser inside my host. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go into the 172.17.0.2 IP, and I'm going to access the port 5000 because it's 5000 on which my web server is listening. And when I run that, I can actually see the welcome message come right here, and you can actually see some output here as well. Another URL that we talked about was how are you. So I'm just going to say how are you in the URL, and it's come back with the message I'm good, how about you. So that's working. So my application is working. So this is how I set up my simple web application. Now, how do I Dockerize it? Let's go back. I'm going to quit the application. I'm going to I've actually got the instructions ready. So the first thing to do is whatever you need to containerize, first go over the basic install steps. So try to do it once manually, and then note down the steps required. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a notepad and write down the steps that I followed. For example, the first thing that I did is apt-get update. So I'm just going to run the history command and pull down all the instructions from that. And then I ran the apt-get install Python. And then I ran pip install Flask, but I had to have Python pip for that. So I'm going to copy pip from here. So this is going to be my next command. And then followed by pip install Flask. And then I created my application file at app.py. So I'm just going to write it down here, create or copy application code to opt app.py. And then finally I ran my Flask application using this command. And this should actually be opt app.py. Okay, so this is all that I need to install and set up and run my application on a new host, on an Ubuntu host. So I have the instructions ready. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to exit out of this container and back to my Docker container. I'm going to run docker ps, and I see there are no containers running. So as we saw in the lecture, the first thing to do is to create a Docker file. So I'm just before that, I'm going to create a directory called my custom app. All right, I'll say my simple web app, and I'll create all the files, all the Docker files inside this particular directory. So the first thing that I need to create is a Docker file. So I'll call it Docker file, and what I did here is, if I look at my instructions, the first thing is before I run the update command, as we saw in the instructions in the lecture, the first instruction should always be from. So I'm going to start from an Ubuntu-based operating system. Okay, so I have the instructions here, and I have my Docker file here. So I'm going to start with Ubuntu, and then I'm going to run the apt-get update command, apt-get update. Then I'm going to run apt-get install -y. -y is required, so it doesn't actually wait there, waiting for your prompt. And then I could do both in this command. I could install Python and python-pip in the same command. And then I need to run the Flask, installing the Flask dependency. So I do pip install Flask. And then this is where I need to copy my source code of the application from my local directory to the Docker container. So I use the copy instruction, and then I say copy app.py. So this would mean this is assuming that I have my app.py in my local directory, which I don't have for now, but as soon as I finish creating the Docker file, that's what I would do next. So I have my app.py, and then I want it to be copied to opt app.py inside the Docker container. And then finally, the application the code to run the application, that would go in entry point. So I'd say entry point is, and just copy the command to run my application. So that's basically it. Before I try to build it, I need my application code in the same directory. So I'm going to create the app.py here and copy the application source code. So I'm all set. I could now run the Docker build command. So I do a Docker build dot, and it's going to start building the image. So I already have Ubuntu, so the step 1 out of 6 was completed immediately because it didn't have to go out and pull the image. Step 2 is running apt-get update, and you can see the output of that particular step right here. Similarly, you will be able to see output of all the it successfully built my image. So if you look at the command, I haven't actually specified a name for the image. So I'm just going to run it again, and I'm going to give a tag. I'm going to say my simple web app. And now, since it's already built, it's just going to go through that real quick because it doesn't have to rebuild the whole image again. As we discussed in the lecture, whenever Docker builds an image, it builds and caches each layer. So all the layers are cached, and I don't really have to, even if I rebuild the image without any changes, it's just going to build real quick, and it's not actually going to go through the whole build process. So now I have my new image. So if I just clear my screen and run a Docker image, Docker images, I can see my new image right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run that by running the Docker run and providing my single web app. And as you can see, it started and it's listening on 5,000. So if I go inside my host, and if I go to that particular URL, I should be able to see that it's listening and it's working. Okay, so that's good, and I could also map a port and access it from my Docker host. Okay, so I have my simple web app image. Now, how do I push it to the Docker hub and make it available to the public? So once I have my application ready, I could push it to the Docker hub by running the Docker push command. Now, before that, you should have tagged your application with your repository. So if you do a Docker push my simple web app, it says requested access to the resource is denied. The reason is, by default, if you didn't specify an organization in your name, it's going to try and push it to the default organization, which is called library, or the default account, which is the library. And not everybody has the permission to push it to that account. That's only for default Docker supported official repositories. So you can only push to repositories under your own account. So first, what we need to do is we need to build the image and tag it with our, not just the name directly, but you need to tag it with your account name. So you're going to do a Docker build once again. And in this time, you're going to tag it with your account name. In this case, my name is Shad, and and you're going to tag it with your application name. Okay, so if I do a Docker images, I can see that I've created a new image, and then now I do a Docker push and provide that repository name, the image name. It says requested access to the resources denied if you haven't logged in. So there's a prerequisite, which is to log in. So you do a Docker login first. Provide your user account. So my user account is this, and I'm going to type in my password. And login succeeded. Okay, so that's good. Now, if I run the push command again, it will push my image to the Docker Hub. Okay, so my application is now pushed to the Docker Hub. So if I go to Docker Hub and if I go to my dashboard, if I'm logged in with the user, I will now be able to see my application right there. So if I look at the bottom, I see my simple web app, and if you go inside it, you should be able to see, you have the command here on how to pull and run this particular application. That's about it. That's available now on public, and if you actually want to make it private, you can actually do that, but with your free account on Docker Hub, you can only have one of private repositories. Okay, so once it's there, any user anywhere in the world can actually pull down your image, your container, and run your application with a simple Docker run command. Okay, so that's about it.